The city of Chicago is rolling out a brand new ordinance that allows people to build coach houses, or accessory dwelling units as they're called in legal terms, and here's why that's a great thing for affordable housing. But before I get into that, just want to introduce myself for anyone who might be new to the channel. My name is Jack Duffley, and I'm a real estate investor and attorney, and on this channel I cover a variety of topics as they relate to investing and personal finance, so if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. But back to this ordinance. For longtime fans of the channel, you'll know that long ago I did a video talking about this very ordinance in Chicago, the one that would allow homeowners to build accessible or additional dwelling units on their homes. I talked about some Chicago-specific problems with the political system and how it's driven largely by individual aldermen or alderwomen who are sort of like mini kings and queens of their respective neighborhoods and often have almost blanket veto power over anything having to do with zoning. So it shot down the bill for a very long time, but it actually ended up making its way through sometime in the winter, and actually January I think is when it officially passed, but it's actually starting to roll out officially in May, which is a fantastic thing for affordable housing. The law allows owners of 1 to 4 unit buildings to build a 5th unit, a coach house, or an additional unit on the land or on the building so that you can actually add to the housing supply. It could also be a great way for homeowners to produce extra income. If they have, say, a 2-unit building and they're currently living in one of the units, well, you can create a coach house in the back of the lot, and there you're living in that, and then you can rent out the other 2 units or something like that. And it's a total win-win because as the owner, you're getting more income, you got more flexibility with your property, and the new tenant also gets a place to live, and there's more units entering the housing supply, which is the crux of why this is a good thing. Because when it comes to affordable housing policy, especially things like rent control or housing vouchers like Section 8, often these things completely ignore supply. And supply is an incredibly important factor for determining how cheap something is going to be, because the more supply you produce of something, the more abundant it is, the less scarce it is. And as long as you have the same number of buyers or prospective tenants, then you're going to see prices decrease when you increase supply. Whereas something like rent control takes the existing supply, slaps a price ceiling on it, and then no one's going to come in to produce additional supply since they can't get the profit margin that they would want in many cases. So the existing supply is completely constricted, so it creates an actual shortage, since maybe more people will want something at that lower price, but less people will actually be willing to produce it because it simply doesn't make sense from a numbers standpoint. You can argue all day about how housing is a fundamental right or something like that, but the question is, how are you actually going to produce that housing in an efficient and hopefully cost-effective way? If you ask me, removing the incentive to create new supply is not a very effective way to do that. But this Chicago ordinance does the exact opposite. It allows homeowners to build extra units, and in some cases with commercial properties over 5 units, they're allowing landlords to actually convert units into smaller units, so they'll go to a greater number of units, they just happen to be smaller, so another way to create affordable housing. Now, of course, there's still an administrative process that people have to go through. It's not as though they can just build units willy-nilly. They still have to go through the city process and submit permits and all that stuff. So it's not as though you're just going to create this flood of supply all of a sudden. There's still some hurdles to get over, but still a tremendous step in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing and creating new housing supply. And this Chicago ordinance could be a great example for other cities and other dense urban areas to potentially follow in loosening zoning restrictions and allowing builders to build, or simply allowing homeowners to add units to their existing property, create new income, give them more flexibility, and reducing those restrictions makes the land more useful. You can do more things with it. You can create more units than you could before, and that is a great thing. We've seen similar sorts of ordinances passed before, including one in California a while back, before the pandemic, I believe, where they were allowing ADU units to be built, so new accessible dwelling units that people could add on to their existing lots. It really is a common sense ordinance. You're allowing people to build housing where it's in demand and where people could use extra units to help lower the cost of housing for everyone. Now, of course, there are some drawbacks since every action has a consequence, and in this case, you are increasing density in particular areas. You're putting more people into the same amount of space. That could lead to parking problems if everyone happens to need a car, but then again, if people want to live there, even if it means that they can't necessarily have a parking spot nearby, they still want to live there and they're going to pay to live there. So what I'm really trying to say is, should a central planner make that decision on behalf of someone else? It seems like an individual's decision to make. If they really need parking and now an area becomes more dense than it did before and it simply doesn't make sense to live there, then they won't live there. They'll live somewhere else. But at least now the people living there or who want to live there will have more housing options, whether that be higher quality housing or simply cheaper housing, or even both if there's a huge increase in supply in a particular area. Now, is something like this ADU proposal going to solve all affordable housing problems? No, of course not. It's one part of a very complicated issue, and it's certainly a great step in the right direction. And ultimately, the number one thing that is going to drive affordable housing in a desirable area is adding supply, because you're not going to reduce demand if people want to live there unless you want to make the place terrible to live in. That's one way to make housing cheaper, make the place terrible so no one wants to live there, but obviously that's not a goal. You could give some people housing vouchers, but that's not really going to keep things affordable in the grand scheme of things, since all you're really doing is artificially boosting income for some people in particular areas, and that's going to artificially produce extra demand if it's coming from newly printed dollars, for example. It certainly could help those individuals, but the best way to help the greatest number of people in keeping housing affordable is to actually create new housing. The tricky part is creating new housing, especially in dense urban areas with lots of red tape. It's very expensive, so you have less incentive to create that housing, because unless rents are just exorbitantly high, then you're really not going to want to build housing there, since it's very expensive, it's time consuming, you might not actually get what you want done because of some red tape or regulatory issues. But when you reduce regulations and therefore increase options with something like this ADU proposal, you're allowing developers, or simply homeowners in this case, who just want to add a unit, you give them that option to do it and to more affordably create housing. And when you can create housing affordably, voila, it becomes more affordable. But like I said, I don't want to oversimplify the issue, because housing is a market. There's two sides to that equation. It's supply and demand. Supply just seems to be one that's often restricted, especially in urban areas where it might be hard to build in the first place, even if there is little regulation, just because there's not a lot of space left in many cases. So you got to get creative with things like accessible dwelling units, where you can actually build extra units on existing plots rather than having to tear everything down and create a big high-rise or something like that. Since that can be very expensive, it's time-consuming, and the land just simply might not be built for it. But the cost to do that just might be so much more substantial, because you have to destroy things first to actually build that. With an accessible dwelling unit, you could just add on to the existing property. You shouldn't be destroying anything, and I'm pretty sure the ordinance itself doesn't allow you to destroy things to actually build these, since that kind of eliminates the point. But anyways, I see this as a significant win for affordable housing, and it would be nice to see even more cities doing this in the future. That's all I've got for today. If you like this video, please like it, since that would help the channel out a lot. And like I mentioned earlier, on this channel I cover a variety of topics as they relate to investing and personal finance. Got a lot of real estate content in there as well. So if you like that sort of content, be sure to have a look around the channel, and if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. And check out the affiliate links in the description below. That too would help the channel out a lot. But until next time, take care.